My guest today is writer-director Harris Goldberg, who started doing stand-up at the age of 16. But when the time came to head to Hollywood, well, upon his revival in LA, he sold his first screenplay within a week and was then signed to William Morris the week after. But 25 studio films later, he scored his biggest success with Deuce Bigalow, Mel Gigolo in 1999 with Rob Schneider, then The Master of Disguise in 2002 starring Dana Carvey and produced by Adam Sandler. But Harris went on to direct Where's Angelo, starring Michael Madsen, Beverly Angelo, and Robert Forster in 2003, which premiered at the Hollywood and Santa Barbara film festivals. But then he went on to write the autobiographical Numb, making his directorial debut starring, well, Matthew Perry, where it premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival and winning Best Feature Audience Awards in Chicago and the Ojai Film Festival. But then Harris Goldberg veered into television, writing pilots for top networks such as HBO, NBC, and ABC, and others. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's welcome writer, director, and filmmaker extraordinaire, the one and the only Harris Goldberg, to the show. Welcome, Harris.
Wow, that's a very nice intro. Thank you. My ego is now 2 notches higher.
Hey, there you go. Well, for you, how did you get interested in film?
Well, I have an older brother who I'm from Canada originally, and he went to a school called McMaster University. And at McMaster, he was best friends with a guy named Ivan Reitman. And those two became best friends and partners and started making films. And at that school, it was sort of a perfect storm in the 60s. There was Rick Moranis, Dave Thomas, Eugene Levy, all those, this real fertile comedic thing. And they were all older, of course, than I was. So I was sort of the younger. And they started making films. And my brother and Ivan made a film called Meatballs with geez, I just
Well,
forgot
it
his
Rick,
name.
Rick Moranis, correct?
No. Bruce,
No.
Bill Murray. What am I talking
Bill
about?
Murray.
Sorry.
Yeah, I had the brain fade there too. Yeah, Bill Murray and Meatballs.
And then they moved to LA, and then the second film they did was Stripes with Bill. And so that launched them. And then, 30 years later, Ivan would direct, and my brother would write and produce, and they did, all those films. And then my brother moved into, became partners with Todd Phillips and did the Hangover series. And anyway, long story short, when I saw his success, I really looked up to him. And so I naturally, when I was very young, I wrote a screenplay over the summer, went to LA for what I thought was going to be 2 weeks, thinking, and when I got there, to me, it was home. And I sold it, and I was very, very lucky. But it was sort of it was 1988, so it was the tail end of what old Hollywood was kind of like at the very, very end. So it was still kind of magical because there were no cell phones, there was no internet. It was all very myopic, very interesting characters, and I fit right in, and that's what happened.
It's and you've probably seen the streaming movie, or I think somebody said there was actually a series, but The Offer. And
Yes.
I love The Offer from the point of view that it was real Hollywood. People were grinding and pounding the ground to get a film made. And you kind of alluded to it already. There's no cell phones. You either had to make an actual landline phone call or show up at somebody's doorstep unannounced to get something done. And
well, here's a little story for you. Is I was a ranked tennis player growing up in Canada. I wanted to be a tennis player, and I played, seriously and tried the circuit, and I just wasn't good enough. So when I gave it up and moved to LA, tennis was huge. Everyone met on the tennis court, just like what you would think. And one of the first guys I ever met was Al Ruddy, who was this older guy who had produced The Godfather, who The Offer is based on, and Al and Bob Evans. And so I would play at their courts as sort of a tennis, quote, ringer every weekend, sometimes 4 or 5 days a week. And so right away through them and through tennis, that was my real foray into this sort of group of people that I would never have been a fly in the wall with. And that got me into the whole thing quickly.
That's
So
pretty
there you
cool because, we all know that, oh, like people who are into golf, business deals are made on the golf course. When I talked to the late Alan Arkin,
hmm
tennis was the big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, because you had Dean Martin and all of those. They were, even though they played golf, they were heavy tennis players. And so that makes a whole lot of sense back in the day of, making connections on the tennis court, which I think is probably far more effective than making connections on LinkedIn or
Well,
Instagram.
and also it's a great equalizer because they're relying on you. So they're calling you, hey, Harris, can you play? I have a game with so and so. And they just want to win because it's very competitive, but they're not great players. So you show up and you're basically, saving the day. And so it's over a few hours. Sometimes they like to play 2, 3 hours. And afterwards, you sit around and have drinks. Then they invite you for dinner. And then before you know it, the business comes up. And then, if you make them laugh or whatever, you become part of that group. And it was just a very seamless thing for me. I didn't realize it at the time. Like to me, I just felt like, I'm playing another tennis game. But that was invaluable. And they were great guys, fascinating guys. The stories they had, I can't tell you, they were amazing.
That does it make you miss the old way of networking?
Complete. I find it. I find the business now. It was really another world. It was magical. I mean, it really was these great personalities. You would make deals on a handshake. You could get one person excited, and the next day you'd be making a deal to your agent or manager or what have you. Now it's a very corporate. It's like going to a bank and trying to get a loan. It's the only thing that's stayed the same is the creative process, which is the only thing you can control is the writing of a project or the directing of it. Everything else is it's almost like the fun has gone out of it in a way, but I still try to find those magical moments when I can, but it certainly isn't what it used to be. So yes, I do miss it.
Man, you defined it perfectly. It is like going to the bank. The process, that side of it now is so sterile. A lot of people who are on that side, sometimes I wonder if they know anything about film at all because there's too many shareholders, too many bean counters. And I think a lot of that is destroying the part of the creative process of getting something made, and basically they're banking on basically a formula, so to speak, that works. This is why I loved the films back in the day. Deuce Bigalow, Stripes, Meatballs, uh, without a paddle. These types of movies are absolutely hilarious, and we don't see this type of film really a whole lot anymore. I mean, every now and then you may see Adam Sandler come out with something that's close to that, or maybe something with David Spade in it. But we don't see a lot of those films that, nowadays, for us who know those films, we can quote the lines from those films. To me, we're not quoting lines from movies anymore.
Do you want me to explain to your audience why it's like that so they understand?
Yes,
Would that be
please.
okay? So I'll tell you why. Because back then, okay, when you did movies, there were basically 6 studios: Warner's, Fox, Universal, Paramount, maybe New Line, a couple of the other ones. And when you would pitch something, it was all in house. So you go and you would meet some older executive who had seen everything. Fascinating. All they liked was stories. That was the great thing. They were very mercurial, outrageous characters, but they understood story, and they had their framework and historical knowledge. They knew 20s films, 30s films, 40 films. So if you all saw the same films and you could reference the same creative output. Now it's very like short. They know 2 years ago and that's it. So when you used to pitch something to the studio, they were paying you to write it, paying you to direct it, financing the movie, doing the prints and the ads, the advertising and the distribution, all under the same 4 or 5 guys in the group. And so everybody was invested in it. And because studios at that time made 40, 50 films, sometimes 30 to 50 films each, they would amortize the films over the year. So you'd have the medium-sized films, the smaller films, and then the tentpole bigger films. So they would expect certain losses, certain ones that would be medium, and certain hits. And at the end of the year, they would say, "Hey, we've made a profit." And so there were lots of room for these medium-sized movies, of which I was in, that sort of comedy, 15 to $20 million thing where you could do a movie, you'd put it out there, it could, if it made 50, 60 million domestically and maybe another 60 million, internationally, and then some DVD or whatever, that was considered successful. Now the bar is so high that if you don't make $1 billion in 2 weekends, it's not considered, so they don't want anything else. So the ideas have to be these intellectual property that everyone knows. So Marvel comics, best-selling books, anything and everything that the international audience will see in a second. But it doesn't mean it's the best film. It's just sort of the biggest, can we get the biggest return in as fast as possible? And the last thing I'll say is, back then, when you had a feature film come out, like Without a Paddle or something, even though I didn't love the movie, but they would be out. It was a big deal to have a feature film because you went out there and would be out for 2 months. Word of mouth would start. It was everyone went to the theater. There was no there was the technology was not there for people who want to watch things at home, and so you had a captive audience, and it was a big deal. Now, if you have a feature film done, it comes out, it's on Netflix right after. It's not what it was. So sorry about bad blabbing, but I thought maybe your audience might enjoy
No,
that.
no, no, because I have a lot of filmmakers that watch my interviews, and a lot of them are up and coming. Maybe they've done a short film, but sometimes I like to use this platform as a way of, getting information out, maybe even teaching other filmmakers things. And it's the old way that, and I know everyone that I've talked to they miss that old way of getting a film made. And it's funny that you say you didn't really like Without a Paddle. That was one of the few comedy films that I've ever seen that literally made me laugh out loud throughout the film. I just fell in love with that film because I love that kind of comedy.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Well, and think about like a film. Think back now on a film like Joe Dirt. There's no
Yeah.
way a film like that would ever be made and then put into the theaters. It'd go to streaming.
Well, and with Deuce Bigalow, that was one. I think it was one of the first R-rated movies. So when we finished it, um, Disney came to me and said, it was Touchstone actually at the time. Touchstone said, "Hey, we want to make this PG-13, and right now it's an R. Can you take out some of this?" So we took out all that stuff, but it completely made it. It just took the edge off. So we had a meeting. Here are these big, executives in your round table, and everyone's talking about, PG-13. And so I just made this point. I think I made it. A couple people agreed, but it was like, I think kids, they're going to be attracted to the edge part of it, and then they're going to get in anyway. And then they're going to see it once or twice, and it may become, you might get some longevity. So they agreed to put it back in, not because of what I said, but because it made sense. And that sort of started that whole kind of, edgier R-rated comedies, of which, was sort of, they would put me together with a SNL person. Can you write a movie with Dana Carvey? Can you write a movie for so-and-so? Can you write it? And you'd hang out with these guys for 6 months to a year. And they were always the same, very, mercurial guys. And you had to figure out, how do I get a movie out of this guy? And it was very interesting to do for a while. And then after a while, you want to do other things. But anyway.
Yeah, I can imagine. And you're right. I never thought about comedies like that where the majority of those were actually PG. But when I'm looking at a title and I see Deuce Bigalow, male gigolo, I don't expect it to be PG.
Yeah. Yeah.
It should be an R. And of course, that movie was a very, very big hit. And again, we don't see those types of films anymore. Do you think? I don't even think I see a whole lot of films like that even going to streaming anymore.
No, I think we're in a time, I mean, we're at a tipping point. For the most part, again, this is just my opinion, but when I look at the content out there, the films are almost, the entertainment value is, I mean, at the bottom line, a story is good entertainment. If you're just trying to go, how do I kill 90 minutes or 2 hours and really entertain someone so they feel like they're being, thrust into another world. So they go, wow, that was great. But now there's a lot of sort of in your face movies that are almost, there's sort of a heaviness to them. And they're all, to me, a lot of them seem very similar. The same kind of characters and the same kind and the originality of movies for the most part. I mean, there's some independents that come out and stuff, but I would not want to be an independent filmmaker now because it's so hard to get noticed. And then you've got the Netflix and the Amazons, and they're monopolies, so they don't care about the audience per se. They just care about subscriptions. So they go, here's how we believe our a film works on our server. So they have these equations that they put their films through.
Well, let's explore that for a moment, because you bring up an idea that's really making sense here. When I sit down and I'm thumbing through tons of films on streaming, and I'll watch a trailer, or I'm like, okay, I'll watch this, and then I'm halfway through the movie, and my first thought is, who the hell wrote the check?
Yeah.
Because, and if Netflix is, and we'll just use them as an example, if Netflix is only after subscriptions and an audience, that means that they're not bringing forth quality films for us to watch, to enjoy. They fall into the category that I just call mind numbing, or it's white noise, where most people are going to be sitting looking at their phone while the film is being played on the television. That's the type of films I don't want to be seeing made anymore. It's garbage.
Yeah, they're programmers for the is what they are. But you have to understand it's coming from two different things, which is one, the storyteller. When I started, I had to learn how to be a writer. What is a good story? I mean, I watched everything. I remember how I learned how to direct was I had lunch with Norman Jewison, who I worshipped. And Norman said, if you want to learn to direct, look at movies you love, turn the sound off, and just watch it over and over and study where are they moving the camera? What emotion are you feeling? What are the shots? And when you started doing that, you literally learned what these directors were thinking. And then you got your own style out of it. But now, with the advent of the technology, I mean, every kid now is pretty adept at editing, and they have their iPhones and they can do anything, but it's more like, it's more noise. Like, how can we get a quick reaction? Then is this a good story? In other words, am I going to watch this character go through this? And is there a twist here? And is there a second act? And is there a third act? And and do I finish this thing going, wow, that was a great story? And there's very, very few good stories. Whereas when I started, if you didn't have a good story and you didn't understand story, you were dead. You weren't getting paid. So that's the change I see. And then to your point, the Netflixes and stuff, they're looking at it like the bottom line. They go, we need to get 10 more comedies, to get you to renew your subscription. So they just hear the log line. They don't really even care about. They just go, oh, that sounds good. Let's whip it on. And then as long as they get more product for you to look at, but that's why the audience is, which I hear is that, to find a movie you want to see, it takes an hour of scrolling, going, do I even want to see anything? And then, so that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, because the audience still cares what they want to see. They're just not being given films good enough for them to stop and actually watch them. when it comes to streaming, the thing that I've noticed, because like Netflix can be hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in debt.
Yeah.
But the audience, we've become the beast that has to be constantly fed. So we're getting a lot of movies that aren't worth watching. And like you said, yeah, so they're going to sign up and do 10 comedies, and probably most of those aren't even worth watching for the most part, especially on streaming. And so they're constantly feeding us, and it shocks me on who's actually writing these checks. That's the thing that blows me away. When I hear filmmakers saying, "Oh, it's so hard," like especially independents, it's so difficult to get funding for this project and that funding, and then I watch streaming and I'm looking at like, who in the world, like I said, who's writing the check and what money tree are they pulling that off of?
Yeah. And it's true. The great thing is, though, if you do a good story, it seems to always find its way. I mean, even now, like at my age, if I write something and it's good, it somehow finds its way through the maze of youth and hype and pyrotechnics. And people go, I love this character. I love this story. And, it's still relevant. So it's still the adage that content is still king in a way is still there. That's the only thing I can control, by the way. It's the storytelling.
Well, I know that you were doing stand up when you were 16 years old.
Yeah,
So I have a question and this has to do with timing to deliver the
sure.
punchline. What is the difference in writing, let's say, a joke that you're going to do for stand up? And then how can you translate that to how does the timing work in film to deliver the funny?
Well, there's different types of, like, stand up is a whole different thing because it's a rhythm thing, just like sitcoms are a rhythm thing. Like half hour sitcom is, you tend to have a dun 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 dun, dun button, set up, dun dun, joke, dun dun dun, and it's just constant, this sort of rhythm. Um, Comedy and film is more of a visual thing. So in other words, it's pauses, it's looks, it's because you've got a bigger landscape and it's a different type of thing because you're not just relying on the one liner or the joke. Okay, now stand up though is very observational, so it's on the delivery of the comic. So once a comic finds like, anyone can tell jokes. Like if you look at the trajectory of stand-ups, it usually starts out the same. You go out and you start doing sort of jokes, and they're okay. And people go, and then you kind of find your voice. Like Louis C.K. His life changed when he started talking about his wife and his family. You know, everyone sort of finds Seinfeld hit it when he was very observational about small things. So once you find out what's that thing, that's what makes the person laugh. Just like if you're at a party, you're at a party and people are laughing at you, they're laughing because of your delivery of how you're telling a story or a situation. And it's the Ward Bondness of it all. It's not the joke per se. It's just like, oh, the way he tells a story is hilarious. And so that's the difference. If it's just jokes, anyone can tell a good joke and you go, ah, ha, ha. But if the delivery of the joke isn't very good, you're only going to rely on, oh, that was an interesting payoff kind of thing. So that's kind of the subtle differences, if it makes any sense.
No, it does. It does make sense. I mean, when you started writing screenplays and creating comedies, did you have to change? Just, I guess there were just a few things that what you had to change from doing writing stand up, and then putting it down as a script and a screenplay for
I had to
actors to
learn this.
deliver.
I had to learn it took me a while because I had to learn. I was always a funny guy, like the class clown guy kind of thing. So I was a defense mechanism. That's usually what happens. And so I used humor as a way of deflecting, fear or this or embarrassment, whatever. And I just kind of learned how to read people, and I could do, that kind of stuff. And so I naturally could sort of write funny moments. But what I had to learn was the structure of screenwriting, the story of like the setup in the first act twist, the second act beginning, and then in the middle of the second act there's something that happens, and then you have the third act, and then where's it going, what are the complications, and all that builds so that you're riveted and going, what happens next, what happens next, what happens next. And as long as you can keep going, what happens next, you've got your audience. So that's the difference. That's what I had to learn was, and I started out like everyone else. I would just follow other people. Like I would get notes from studios and you just try to make them happy. But it wasn't really making the best script. It was just like, oh, I have to do something that they want to see as my employer. But I had that aha moment when I went, you know what? I'm only going to write what really turns me on from now on. And as soon as I did that, it changed everything.
Well, yeah, when you go with your gut, sometimes that is the very thing that you have to have that opens up the door. Instead of following a formula or following what somebody is saying, which, probably has worked in the past. But, we have so many creative people today that they just need to, go with their gut, think outside the box and go for it. I think that, Hollywood is a place where dreams are made and dreams are broken, but they're still being made.
Listen, it's all the same in a way. I mean, I'm testament. The fact that I was a kid from Canada. I go to a new country, a new Hollywood. And I end up making a living as a making movies and TV shows. It was a billion. But the one thing I had confidence is that I like telling stories. And then you find, your voice, and some people want to, pay for that, for whatever reason. And if I can make it, anyone can make it, and it's fun. I mean, it is fun to have a movie done, and you see your name on it, and people are laughing, and it's a big kick.
Yeah, I miss comedies. I miss comedies being at the theater.
Yeah.
I miss the type where when you see it, and then let's say, back in the day, it would take 6 months or a year before it ever appeared on television.
Yeah.
And of course, then times changed when you had to wait 6 months to a year for the DVD to come out. But by that time, we already had most of the lines memorized. And if you were having a conversation with a friend and maybe the conversations turned out to be funny, you would pull a line out of the film and then everybody laughs.
Remember Blazing Saddles? I just saw that the other night. I remember what a big deal that was. It was like you got all your friends together, and it was a whole event to go to see Blazing Saddles. And sometimes you'd go 3 times in a year or so, or whatever it was. And it became a cultural phenomenon. Everyone was saying the lines from these iconic comedies, but now they get lost pretty fast now.
Yeah. I think that has to do with streaming and people's very, very short attention spans. If I think back and think of a comedy that people today, probably millennials, will quote, and that's probably Napoleon Dynamite, which was a film that was a freak of nature.
That's right. I would say that is a very good example. And I would say that when the film my brother produced, the first Hangover, had that effect, which was a fluke. Nobody wanted to make it. They only made it because Todd was doing another film. He said, if you let me do this film, I'll do this other film. And they said, okay, but we're not going to pay any salary. And he goes, I'll just take it all in the back end. And then the movie became huge and he made a fortune. And that was a fluke. Nobody thought that was going to do any business, and it just got into the zeitgeist somehow.
I'm hearing whispers with the possibility that there could be a fourth one coming.
Possible. I mean, listen, now is the time of remakes, or they'll do anything to keep it going.
Oh yeah. Now with you, because you had alluded to earlier about writing with, let's say, certain SNL cast members, trying to figure out what kind of film to create for them. Now, you did The Master of Disguise. What was it like writing with Dana Carvey?
Dana, he was a fascinating guy. Dana was hilarious. Okay, so Dana's the kind of guy that when you're with him, you don't have to say a word. He just keeps you laughing about everything. You can get a hamburger and he'll do a whole But the trick with Dana was he was so fast. He had so many characters. You're going, how do I get a movie out of this guy? And so that's where we came with, we said, hey, what about doing all of these characters? And we came up with this master of disguise thing. However, so we spent every day together, became really tight, spent every day together. And we wrote a R-rated script, which was great. We thought it was great. And I remember we handed it in to the producers. And on Saturday, they called and said, they were very complimentary about it. I won't say exactly what they said, but we were very pleased. And we thought we got it made, because they never call on Saturday. And on Monday, we went into Sony Pictures and we had a meeting with everybody, all the executives and all that stuff. And the head guy of the studio, who I won't say who it was, but he didn't get the movie. And so he said, I want to make this, here's another example. I want to make this a PG-13 movie. So he didn't get the edgy, and Dana was an edgy guy. Okay. He could really, and we really tapped into who he was, which was, even though he was hilarious, there's a little anger and sarcasm underneath. And we captured that. This guy wanted Dana to be the goofy thing. So Dana got upset. And the movie was over because they got into an argument there. So I just went, what happened? Am I telling you too much here? I don't want to.
No. I'm listening. I'm soaking this in.
So I go home thinking, we just had a go movie and now we don't. What happened? About a week goes by and the executive calls and he goes, listen, I know things got a little off. Is there any way you could talk Dana into doing? So I went to Dana and talked to him, and he didn't really want to do it. And I said, well, what if I could come up with a PG-13 movie? So he lived up in Mill Valley. So on the plane ride home, I was sort of coming up with, and I kind of came up with a very quick thing I thought that the executive wanted. So the executive said, okay. So Dana agreed to it. So we rewrote the script, but we lost it. We lost the magic of the first one. You know what I mean? It's almost like, it's like you've told someone you love them and then it doesn't work out and they meet somebody else you don't quite love, but you're still trying to say, I love you. The edge is gone. So we wrote that movie and it became, the movie came out and it was actually, to be honest with you, even though it made money, okay, it got some of the worst reviews, I think, in the history of Rotten Tomatoes. They were so good and so imaginative. I actually thought they were brilliant because every review was worse than the other, but more intense. And I thought they hated this so much that they took real time to write these brilliant reviews. But somehow the movie, really, really young kids, I'm talking 5, 6 years old kind of thing, they really enjoyed it. And somehow it made money. I don't know how, but it did. But that was an example of a movie that we thought was going to be a game changer and turned out to be, so
it's kind of funny because the way you're telling some about the bad reviews, that's almost a film.
Yeah,
there's a film in there somewhere about it's almost like a down and out actor that just keeps getting bad reviews over and over again.
Yeah, it's like he's so,
yeah, there's a story there somewhere.
Yeah.
Now, Harris, I'm a very huge lover and fan of short films, and you directed Where's Angelo, which starred Michael Madsen, Beverly D'Angelo, and Robert Forster. I actually sat down the other day and watched it. And
oh my God.
With that film, what blew me away was how short film. So that was 2003. From that point till today, short films have changed dramatically. From what you did in 2003, now we're looking at short films, which are these cinematic marvels of masterpieces that are all trying to get an Oscar.
Right.
And yours had this simplicity. There was a little bit of this film noir in that film, which I noticed right off. And I think it has a lot to do with the actors that you chose for this film. And even in short films, we don't see actors of that caliber doing a whole lot of shorts today.
Well, that's an interesting little story because that project came to me. It was a friend of mine was financing this short film, and the lead actor wanted to direct it. This kid or something. Anyway, something fell out, so he came to me at the last minute, like 3 days or 4 days before they were going to shoot. So something happened, and he said, "Can you just do this for us because we don't know what to do?" And I didn't particularly love it, to be honest with you. And I didn't want this. I said, "Oh, I don't think this is going to be very good." And they said, "Please." And I thought, well, let me see. And I had some friends that, like, I knew Robert Forster, I knew Beverly, and I asked them. I say, "Will you guys? I got this thing." I said, "Do you want to kind of improv it? Like, we could just give it a shot and see. I can try and piece this together, but it could be fun, you know." And so Robert said, "Okay," and Beverly said okay, and then and Michael Madsen just wanted to work, you know, and Michael said, "Yeah, I'll be in it." So I got all these guys I knew, and we just showed up with no script, no nothing. And so I was just trying to sort of make something out of nothing. But don't forget, back then, short films were you had actual film cameras, okay, and you had lights and everything. So it would cost like 50 grand, 40 grand to do a short. Not like today where the tech you can get your iPhone is 10 times more brilliant than these things. So they just didn't want to blow the money they had raised. So I just sort of went by the seat of my pants with these. I didn't even know what the story was, but I said, let's just do it like guns and let's have fun. And Robert Forster, who was a big, I think one weekend, we went to Quentin Tarantino's house for a weekend to watch movies, which was a bizarre experience, I have to say. Um, but Robert really looked up to him. And so he had a lot of influence of, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? So it sort of became this weird sort of noirish little short thing. Anyway, long story short, we made it. It is what it is. But nowadays, these kids are, the editing that you can do your edit, the editing was way more sophisticated now. The phone, the cameras you can use are brilliant. The what they're able to do for nothing. And
Yeah, well,
so
yeah. I mean, when I found out I can't remember which short film it was. It was in 2023. Um, it was nominated for Best Live Action Short for the Oscars, and Disney spent $1 million. And I'm like, why and what is wrong with you? Because that gets to the point to where you're just trying to buy the Oscar, and you don't need to spend $1 million on making a short film. I have seen short films that are absolutely cinematically mind blowing, incredible storytelling that were probably done for less than 20 grand.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if you have a great imagination and a great story, you can blow anyone away with. But the thing is, that's the problem. Is that with TikTok and YouTube and everyone doing these little like look at me, and it's like you're looking at train wrecks and car wrecks every 2 seconds. The bar is so high because it's more like what's the shock value, as opposed.
And that's all that social media video stuff is. It's shock value.
Yeah,
It's not leading the so-called these people that call themselves creators. It's not leading them anywhere. And but I talk to so many filmmakers from around the world, and I am thankful that we still have some extremely creative minds. We have creative writers and producers and directors, and there are some stellar content coming out. When it comes to the short films, most people will never, most of the public will never see them. And that's where part of my argument lies, because like in the Oscar run, the feature films can be seen throughout the year in the theaters or on streaming. Short films are not allowed to be seen technically by the public unless you showed up at a film festival. They won't be
right.
released to the public until after the Oscars are over. So
Yeah.
nobody knows the magic of the short film.
Yeah, very tough to do a short film and get recognized for it. I mean, some people slide through and there's a word of mouth, and people start passing them around and things, and there's sort of that kind of can happen, but it's tough to put all that effort and money, and because it's just the same thing as doing a feature, it's just everything's cut in quarters, but it's still tough, and you're still investing all your time and energy on it. So
Yeah,
um,
and there's technically no money to be made in a short film,
yeah.
but because you directed Where's Angelo, did that lead you into not? Well, of course, you wrote and you directed the award-winning film Numb, which starred
Yeah.
Matthew Perry, Lynn Collins, and Kevin Pollak. Did directing Where's Angelo, did that kind of help you when you walked into doing a full-blown feature like Numb?
Yeah, because first of all, when you haven't directed before, and then you're put in front of a crew, and you have to, it's like being the coach of a team. You realize that for me, directing was more, oh, I've got these interesting, talented people around me, but they all have issues with their lives and things. How do I navigate it to get the best out of these people to give me what I need to have this thing? It wasn't so much about me going, oh, here's my vision and everything. It's going like, here's what I wrote. Here's how I see it. Can you help me get there? So once you do it, and you actually go through the machinations of, oh, here's what it's just tough to light this scene here. Oh, this is what it means to turn around a scene. Oh, this is what, and you learn that, it gives you confidence because it's a whole different mindset than writing. So now you start thinking in terms of, oh, how long is it going to take to shoot this? Can I do this without, you know, um, changing locations? How can I save money doing this? So when I did Numb, they did not want me to direct it. But it was such a personal story because I had done the short film. I went, oh, I know I can at least get through. I know I can at least do it. I don't know how good it's going to be, but I know I can do it. So when Matthew came on board, um, I just stuck to my guns, and then finally, they said okay, and turned out to be a very special movie for me. And Matthew became a very, very dear friend. And he was sad what happened to him, but that was a very special movie, and everybody was really invested in it. And it still holds up to today. And and then from doing that movie, it allowed me to direct the next one, which was this one called Alex and the List. So you start to get confidence, is what it does. And so then you understand what it means to be a director, which is how to talk to a bunch of people, 50 people on your crew, and there's always all kinds of a lot of it's just keeping it together, because there's insanity. Everyone's just going, what do I do, what do I do? And you just have to keep the ship from, you go, how do I keep the ship afloat, and make the day without going over, and
Yeah.
things like.
I mean, Francis Ford Coppola said, when you show up on a set and you're the director and you're not sure what you are going to do that day, you walk in there, act like you already know what you're going to do, and depend
Yeah.
on the people around you to get it done. So that way it makes it look like you knew what you were doing.
In fact, what I do now is I storyboard everything by hand. So when I write a script, I'll take 2 months and literally go. So I literally have directed it on paper, just so that I can go, okay, I know what I'm doing basically. So if I was thrust in there, I can say, okay, here's what we're shooting today. Here's the moves. Here's the angles. So at the very least, if we don't have time to talk about it, I go, let's just get this. And so at least they feel like somebody's helming the ship here. So.
Yeah, one of the greatest stories that was ever told to me about storyboarding was actor Louis Mandylor, who played
Mhm.
Nick in Big Fat Greek Wedding. And I interviewed him one day, and it really got to be funny because he got called into acting this film.
Mhm.
And so there was supposed to be this, one of those conference room kind of meetings, and he never showed up. And the director and the producer and everybody's like, where's Luis? Where is he at? Go find him. So they went out, found out that what hotel he was staying in. They walked into his hotel room, and Louis is just standing there, and he looks at him and goes, "Here's your film." A lot of people don't realize that he is an artist, and he literally wrote all the storyboards, and they're
Wow.
all taped from one end of the hotel room all the way around, and they're walking around his hotel room
Wow.
looking at each frame, and he goes, "Here's your film." And it was the funniest thing because it's like you did their job for them, but it was funny because here's an actor who actually understood their complete vision. And because he's an artist and loves to do that kind of stuff, he went ahead and did their homework for them.
Wow. Well, Alan Ladd was a friend of mine. Remember Alan Ladd Jr.?
Oh my gosh, yes. Wow, what an icon.
Wonderful guy. And I knew Alan through, I used to play tennis at his house every day. And he just became friends and he became sort of mentorish to me. Very sweet guy. And he would tell us stories. He once told me about how he picked Star Wars. So he said George Lucas had come to his office and everyone passed because it was really a kid's movie, is what it was at the time. But George was smart enough that he hired this really well-known artist who did these expansive, beautiful landscapes where it was there was a juxtaposition of sizes. So he had things where he had like the ship versus the small. They're real striking thing. And he paid the guy to do a number of these frames. And he said because George had brought in these visuals that gave us a sense of the scope of how big this could be, that's made me think, oh, this guy's got a vision of what this could be. I'm going to take a flyer on this and give it a shot. And the other guy who did the same thing was Peter Jackson when he did the Lord of the Rings here. He came into Robert Shea, who was at that time who was a character who was running New Line, but Peter Jackson was smart enough to I also did the same thing. He had these visual things where you got a sense of what you're saying. So the buyer is going, oh, if it looks like this, anything like this, I put money into that. And so then immediately they go, well, if he's thinking like that, let's give it a shot. And so you never know what little visual aid can really put someone over the top.
Well, I want to ask you something about your film Numb because
Mm.
you wrote it, you directed it, and it's a very, very personal project. Being in the director's chair, was there difficulties of getting your idea and your story on to film? Because this isn't, I mean, people can write an autobiography, they can write a book, tell everybody about their life, but to stand behind the camera
Yeah,
and look through it and then trying to visualize and putting this into movement, how difficult was that?
that's a good question. First of all, at the begin when I wrote it, I didn't think it was going to be a movie because it was more a cathartic thing. I think I just had done a couple of comedies, these, and I got tired of them, and I just wanted to write something for myself. So when I wrote this, I really thought, no one's going to see this. But when I'd given it to the producer, Paul Schiff, and Paul had done Rushmore, which was a good little movie, Wes Anderson's first film. And he said, this is really raw. I really like this. And so when he gave it to Matthew, when I met Matthew, I didn't want Matthew because I saw Matthew as the friends guy, and he was sort of had this bag of tricks that he could use, which he was very funny, but he was just kind of, and I saw it as myself, and I'm going, oh, how do I get the pain of this character? I don't know if this guy can do it. But then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I got to stop looking at this as me. So I started to talk to Matthew about what he had gone through similarly. And he started opening up about his life. And I saw the parallels of oh, he feels this way about this. So I started to sort of go, how do I get what I went through out of him, but he's identifying with what he went through. So all the characters in that movie, even though they were sort of based on real things, every actor, I would just talk about their situation, not talk about the movie I wrote, but talk about here's what happened with this character. have you ever had something happen like that? And they would say, well, when I was, and then they would say some very compelling story. And I go, do that. That's what this is about, is what you just said, not what I wrote, what you just said. And then that allowed them to kick into a performance. And I went, oh, I think this is, I can get something out of this. And that's the difference. So as a director, it was a different thing. I had to divorce myself from being a writer and think like a director, which is how do I get a, how do I know this is, I'm not making, I'm
Well,
not
no.
explaining this.
Well, let me ask you this: how does one? And of course, it was Matthew Perry. How were you able to get someone to portray what depersonalization disorder is?
Because I made Matthew, we had a lot of conversations. Matthew and I hung out for months before it. And I just wanted him to feel safe with me and turn off and not be on, because Matthew was brilliant at any situation you were in. He could turn it on. But what I started to notice was that when he wasn't on, he would start to get like he would just, I could see there was a darker side to him. And that's when I started to let him, I wanted him to feel safe enough to talk to me about those periods. And so when we started talking about that, he would start to reveal things, and we became very close that way. And I said, that's what we want. That's what I want to get. I want to get that Matthew Perry in this, not this guy. This guy, he didn't want to do it because he felt uncomfortable there. And that was the whole thing. I said, if you trust me and you just let me direct you and we work together on this and you give me that guy, I guarantee you, you'll be proud of the performance, but you're going to feel uncomfortable. And he did. And when we shot it, it was constantly, he would want to do something funny because he didn't think it was enough what he was doing. And I would often say, cut. And I'd go over to him and I'd talk to him very quietly. I go, look, from here, don't do anything. It's enough. You don't have to do anything. Just let your expression, because he was very powerful when he was. And so it was more like that. And once we got into that rhythm and he started getting into it, he let go of having to do anything. And that's what creates sort of, and I said, and to answer your question, I didn't say, give me what depersonalization is like or whatever that is. I go, show me what it was to be depressed. Show me what it was like to feel anxious. Show me what it was like when you were telling me that story about being lonely, when you were being every time you were at a party or event, you felt like the last person on earth. Do that. Don't worry about me. Do that. And that's where he could then remember what he was like, and he would capture that. And so
Yeah, I
that was,
think, yeah, because I think when actors go to a very uncomfortable place, maybe a place they've never been,
mm,
it just makes them become a much better actor. But they have to take that chance to go there. But and keep in mind that it's a film. But at the same time, I know that actors have to pull a lot of times from real life experiences to get that scene across. And
yeah,
with Matthew
yeah.
Perry, what is the most memorable? What is the thing that you remember the most about him?
He was very sensitive. Matthew was a very sensitive guy, and and when you got him at those moments, the quiet moments, where where he felt really, like I said, very safe, he would be incredibly vulnerable and just very sweet. And it was like a little boy, and you felt like you wanted to protect this kid, and you felt protective of him. And so I enjoyed that part of it. Was so when he passed away, I wasn't that surprised because he was tortured. Matthew struggled a lot, and but I understood what that's like being on, having to be, his level. I mean, it was ridiculous. Wherever we went, I didn't even realize how big he was. Because I watched Friends, but not a lot. But I didn't realize what a phenomenon it was. But wherever we went, it was just insane. And I think he was both attracted to that because it sort of was, that's how he defined himself, but he also hated it at the same time. So it was a constant, and he seemed lost sometimes. And that's what I was attracted. That's what I remember about Matthew was that he was just a very special guy that way. He made you want to love him. Is what it was like.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. And I want to ask you a question about being a writer? Because I had to pull up two films and use them as a comparison. I want to let you explain because I know that with the film Without a Paddle, you were listed as a story writer on that film, where
Hmm.
Deuce Bigalow, European Gigolo, you're listed as a character writer. What's the
Hmm.
difference between the two for all the young screenwriters out there?
Okay, well, very quickly, uh, in transparent, I'll be transparent about this. On the second Deuce Bigalow, the studio came to me and they said, "Hey, we want to make a sequel." And Rob and I had sort of had a bit of a falling out on the first one. Um, and so, but I was okay with doing it again, but it was going to be hard. So I told them, what I thought the second one should be, because the first one to me was only successful because Rob was very sweet to all the people, the tricks he was seeing. He didn't sleep with any of them. He just helped them. So everyone else was crazy, but he was sort of the heart. And then the second one, um, Rob wanted to make a movie where it was crazy. Like, and I said, I think if you do this, it's going to end the franchise. And the studio was like, they kind of agreed in a way, but Rob wanted to do it on to go his way. So I said, just pay me off and I'll walk away, because I had first dibs to do as the original writer. So I took a payoff to walk away, and by virtue of that, you get characters created by, because you have nothing to do with the story. Okay, so I knew that, but I couldn't bear to spend 6 months writing a movie that I knew I didn't want to write and go through all that again. And the movie came out and it wasn't very successful. I mean, it has a few laughs in it, but it really was like not that I was. It just seemed like I didn't think it could last after this.
Yeah.
And Without a Paddle was actually when we wrote that script. The what comes out when you finish a movie script is it goes to arbitration if they have any other writers on there. So we had written the first original script, and the tentative writing credits come out. So in other words, the studio goes to the Writers Guild and says, "Here's who we think should get screenplay written by credit." And it was myself and my partner at the time uh, to write it, the original guys of that. But the two writers that they had brought on to do a rewrite, and they wanted to arbitrate it, and it's their right as a writers, so anyone can arbitrate. So they went to the Writers Guild. So the Writers Guild was going to arbitrate, but usually they always give the tentative credits to whoever the studio says, we think these guys, and these guys just pushed and pushed. And when you go to an arbitration, it's kind of a crapshoot, because you really get a collection of older writers and people, and they read all the scripts, and it's a function of, are they focused? How good is the presentation or whatever. And somehow they gave these other two guys the screenplay credit by, and so by virtue you drop down. You can't go lower than story by credit. Now I have to say we were pretty devastated, and and that's when I started to realize, wow, there's some, I don't know how when you go through these arbitration process, it's a crapshoot. You never know who the people are, who's so you're just sort of, it's faceless, and you don't know what the, so that was tough to swallow, but it happens. And so, but because we lost our screenplay credit to those two guys, the lowest we could go down to was story by credit, which is MBA, or Writers Guild regulation. So
Wow. Yeah. Well, filmmaking is complicated, isn't it?
it have if you ask this is why it's good for anybody who's any of your young filmmakers that are watching your show. It's good to look at the history of every movie. And an easy way to do that is, whenever you see a movie come out, look at the Wikipedia page, and it'll give you production notes. And you'll see, oh my God, this has been around for 5 years, 10 years. You'll see all the actors that came in and came out. You'll see the financing that fell out. You see the credits and all this stuff. And you go, oh, this is not just some, you know, magical, glamorous thing. It's brutal. And yeah, the business, it's a tough business, and you gotta fight when you need to fight, and back off when you can't win, and then you have to just, the rejection, you have to take it on the chin and just keep moving. But it can eat you up.
Wow. I mean, for you, because you've done feature films as a writer, and you've also written for television. What are the challenges as a writer when you are writing for a television series versus a feature film?
It's a good question. I find writing television much. I don't want to use the word easier, but it's. I think because you're not having to wrap it up in one fell sweep. So I like the time. It's for me writing a half hour is I can do it in a few days. And really, when you're writing an hour, a drama, it's more like the setup, but you don't have to pay it off. The difference is TV is much more of a business than features. So when I finish a pilot and send it in, it's always who are the showrunners going to be? Who are the because the TV network or whoever it is, the path of least resistance is let's give it to someone who has delivered a show on time for us in the past. So they feel comforted by going, we'll let so and so who did NCIS or whatever it is. And so you're always battling with the politics of television. Okay, so it's a much more of a you've got to be much more political when you're doing television. So I find like feature, if I write a good feature, I can pretty much say, I want to direct this, here's the actor or whatever. And they'll say, well, let's give it a shot. And they try to raise the money and you make it. TV, they want to know, what company's going to do it. The biggest thing is the showrunner. And it's not like I won't partner with a showrunner, but if I create my own show, I want to be an integral part. I don't want to get. I've also been in situations where you bring on somebody and they can't help but change it to what they would want to do, and it takes the magic out of it. So, and I think now is a time, actually a good time to be in television for any young person, because I think now they're taking uh, they're taking series from all over the world. So it's not like it used to be that if you weren't with one of the top, if you weren't with Wells or any of these, 4 or 5 guys, you weren't getting your show done. But now, if you've got a good pilot and you've worked it out, you can pretty much talk your way into doing the whole thing at a certain point. It's just because the network television is no longer as big as it was. You don't have the same kind of money behind you because it's not advertising based for the most part. So that's why you get a lot of these streaming shows and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, and I understand the whole showrunner thing because they want somebody with a proven track record of success. And if you have the right showrunner tied to the project, the chances of them saying yes is probably much higher. So I get that. And of course, we've seen the success of showrunners in normal traditional television who have made that leap over to streaming. And some of them, they got their hand in both sides. I mean, I know Shonda Rhimes does. She's got it anywhere from ABC with Grey's Anatomy, which I think, probably won't end until Jesus comes back. And then, of course, she's had her hand in streaming. And
But if you do both, if you're both a physical showrunner, so you can and you're also the creator, that's when you're really batting 1,000. That's like David E. Kelly territory.
yeah,
There's a guy who he writes the thing, he can write them all, or Sorkin. you know so to me, show running to me is more the physical, like practically getting the show up and running, getting it on time or whatever. I just want to make sure that creatively, if you create a show, the tone that you've set forth as the creator of the show, that's what the show is and keeps it going. So you just have to think it's just a slightly different. It's not ego. It's just here's the product. How do I see it through to give you the product you want in the best way possible? And so it's all a negotiation. Every new project starts from scratch, and it's like, okay, how are we going to do? What's the baseball team on this one?
yes, yes. Well, I have a question for you because since I talked to so many filmmakers, I find it very interesting with those that are doing feature films, and I'm talking about independent filmmakers. And if
Mhm.
they're not getting picked up by, let's say, Angel Studios or Lionsgate or Seven Films, I've talked to some independent filmmakers to where it's like I'm going straight to streaming. Then there are those that are trying to work out, even if it's just a minor distribution deal. Maybe they're in 50 theaters. Maybe somebody gets lucky and they're in 1,100 theaters. But for today's independent filmmakers, should they even try to get a theatrical release?
Well, these are really good questions, Ward. I got to tell you, it's a good question. Okay, first of all, when you do a film and you've got your film in the can and you're going, okay, where am I going to put it? When you go to a streamer, the problem is the deals are really lousy for the most part because they know that you're a captive audience. So if you go to, whatever, any one of these places, they go, here's our deal, take it or leave it. And it almost doesn't make, they basically, it's so skewed to them making all of it. And you're just getting like, you won't even see anything for them. It's all net profit. Theatrical, if, I've done this before where the film didn't get a proper theatrical, but we put it out for a weekend anyway, just so it could be reviewed as a theatrical. So we actually, paid for it to be in, 5 or 6 theaters in LA and 3 theaters in New York. And, just enough that it would be out, it would get reviewed, and we could say we have theatrical reviews, which would then push the advertising of the film. That can, like Napoleon Dynamite, you mentioned that. There's one that came out of nowhere. It wasn't supposed to do anything. They put it out there. It got some good reviews, word of mouth spread, and then it becomes a phenomenon. You know, so can that happen? Yes, that's the home run. So I would say, uh, sure. If you can get a theatrical and get it reviewed well, it doesn't take much. If you get one good reviewer and he puts it out there, and if you can get a few. Now, Rotten Tomatoes. I know I'm going on and on. I'm
No,
sorry,
no,
but
no, no. I'm learning.
Rotten Tomatoes used to be really great because it was very unbiased. And so you get if you got reviews and you had got good reviews, people really counted on that. Now you don't know what reviewers are being paid off or whatever. So it's not the same. But there's still a handful of reviewers that if you get a good enough review and you can skew it that way, that can push your film out to the forefront and get you noticed. And that's all you want is just to get people talking about it because it's like, you should see this. So if I say, hey, Ward, you got to see this movie this weekend. Will you just see it? Watch 5 minutes of it. And you go, all right. And you watch it and then you go, hey, this was really great. And then you pass it on. Okay. Well, that's what makes careers. So, so what I'm saying is, sure, when you do an independent film, could it get lost and nobody sees it? Of course. But that's the beauty of the business is that if you do cross over, you have a career, and it's an interesting way to make a living, and it's satisfying in a lot of ways. It's brutal in a lot of ways, but it's certainly different than a 9 to 5 job.
Oh yeah, very much so. And
Yeah.
filmmaking is strictly an act of faith every step of the way. And I've had filmmakers tell me that in every project, there's always the little miracle that shows up when you think that you were dead in the water and then something happens, your film gets made, and all of a sudden it's either an award-winning short or it's a feature film that actually got noticed that most people thought that it never had a chance to see the light of day.
I'll give you one more little metaphor here.
Sure.
I've always got 6, 7, 8 projects going. Like bunch of pilots, bunch of movies, and they're all in various stages of people sending them out, whatever. And I got to the point like a week and a half ago where I went, oh, I just can't do this anymore. I can't. And I came up with an idea in the middle of the night. I went, oh God, I would love to see that. And I whipped it off in a week, because I just love doing it because I still love to write. So I finished this thing. I go, wow, this was really fun. I gave it to a couple of pretty big TV producers and they go, hey, this is really great. Now it's got some juice to it, right? So that's how quickly it changes. So that's what keeps me addicted to it is I go, if it's the right idea and I can execute it, this may be a shot. And it's hard to turn that down. And I think that's what makes me a writer is that I enjoy doing the writing. So it's like being a tennis player. It's like I don't want to quit tennis. I still enjoy playing it, and once in a while I can hit a great, topspin backhand on the line and for a winner, and you go, wow, where did that come from? So that's
Well,
fun.
for you, are there any new projects you have coming up for 2024?
Yeah, I've got two movies that are one's a sci-fi movie, which I really very pleased with, and then I've got a thriller called Quick Draw, which I'm directing, and that originally was going in 2017. There was a guy named Lorenzo de Bonaventura who was producing that at that time, who had done Transformers, and we had it financed, greenlit. Um, we had a cast. It was great. They announced it in trades and everything, and I thought I'd be shooting. That fell through at the last minute back in 2017. I sat on it for a while, but I knew it was a good script. Brought it out after the pandemic, and now that's gotten traction again because that type of movie is back. So I've got those two movies. I've got three different pilots that have actors of note attached to them. I would tell you who they are, but I shouldn't. So
Oh,
I
no,
just
no,
want
no. I understand.
to. So those are being shopped right now, and then in the meantime, I just pretend like it doesn't exist. And I've got two other things I'm writing and another feature I'm almost finished because I just keep coming up with new product and going, okay, I finished that. That's out there in the world. Whatever happens, happens. What can I do that's new? And I just keep doing it. And every time I get something and it goes the distance, it gets made, I go, I can't believe I did it again. And that's what keeps me. I've done that since day one.
Wow.
So if you want to call that faith, okay, I don't know, maybe it's desperation because I don't know what else I do, but they keep getting made. As long as you persevere, it keeps happening.
Hey, that's what it's all about. It's perseverance, it's consistency, but you're going to have to send me the screeners on the new two feature films so that way I can watch them,
Done.
write a review, but you got to come back so we can talk about them.
Love to. These have been really great questions. Really, Ward, you're a very, very bright guy.
Well, Harris, I appreciate that. And I'm going to thank you so much for coming onto the program and sharing some extremely valuable insights for all of the, for much of my audience, which with Bondon Cinema is usually filmmakers from around the world. So I know they're going to appreciate hearing the insights coming directly from you, knowing that you have a wonderful track record in film as well as television. And again, send me the screeners and we'll do this again.
Done. Thank you for doing this. I enjoyed it. Very, very. It was a lot of fun.